Is anxiety ruining your marriage? If it is, you're not alone. And today we're going to talk about anxiety and some things that you can do to help keep anxiety out of your relationship. So stay tuned. All right, so anxiety. Anxiety is something that plagues hundreds of thousands of individuals around the world. And it's a big issue in many, many relationships that I treat every day. So I want to talk a little bit about anxiety today and some of the impacts that anxiety can have on your relationship if you're not careful. And one of the first things that I think we need to keep in mind as we talk about anxiety is the obsessive nature of anxiety. Right? So anxiety by nature is obsessive, which just means it wants to take your mind and it wants to preoccupy your mind with it, right? All the things that it thinks, all the things that it feels, and all the things that it wants you to do, right? So it's obsessive. It often pulls individuals' minds out of other things that they would like to focus on. And they do this thing called rumination, right? Ruminating just means kind of spinning in your mind in the same place around the things that anxiety says to focus on. It makes it hard to focus on other things when anxiety is present. And one of the reasons it's tough is because anxiety goes catastrophic all the time. So anxiety isn't kind of filling your mind with things that are just simple, common, normal, chill, everyday things, right? It's catastrophic. The thing that it wants to put into your mind oftentimes is worst case type scenarios, catastrophic scenarios, right? So it's not nice in what it feeds your mind. It doesn't give you pleasing, happy things to focus on. It's often focusing your mind on catastrophic things. And what's worse is it's not just catastrophic things, but it's catastrophic things that anxiety says is high probability, right? So it's not treating these catastrophic situations with low level probability like they probably exist in life, right? It's saying every what if that anxiety can put in your head has equal probability, and they're all catastrophic. So no wonder, right, we get preoccupied with anxiety and we ruminate in anxiety, and it makes it hard for us to focus on other things. So that's one of the big issues with anxiety, and you can already tell how that can become problematic in a relationship. Another difficult thing about anxiety is that anxiety drives inaction. So what we mean by inaction is anxiety says it's safer not to take actions, especially actions that might be risky, right? And because anxiety calls everything catastrophic and says it's all high probability, right? It can what if all kinds of catastrophic scenarios, worst case scenarios, and they all have the same probability of occurring. They can often leave an anxious person without taking action because every action feels risky, right? So because it feels risky, anxiety says the safest place for you to be is not in that thing, not taking that risk, right? And when you think about vulnerability in a marriage, vulnerability requires risk. Every relationship that's out there requires a little bit of risk, which makes being vulnerable in a relationship really hard when you're preoccupied with anxiety. But not just in a relationship. It can make it really hard for you to put yourself out there for that promotion at work, or to really try at that hobby or interest that you have, to really put yourself out there into those lessons or trying out for the team. It can make it really hard to travel, right? It can make it really hard to make a social move, a social risk, right? Because anxiety can see everything through the lens of risk and high risk, catastrophic potential outcomes, anxiety can drive inaction. Anxiety can also drive reaction, right? So what we mean by reaction is instead of responding to everyday things as an everyday thing, anxiety is always spinning our mind into catastrophic what ifs, right? So it's very rare that we're able to just enjoy kind of peace, quiet, chill moments in our relationships when anxiety is in the mix, because it's always kind of screaming what if. And the what ifs are big and catastrophic. And so we're constantly kind of hyper alert, hyper aware, and maybe even hypersensitive in relationships because of that. So it makes us reactive in that way, right? Instead of us being able to choose kind of a response to the day-to-day stimulus that's happening in front of us, the day-to-day interactions with our partner, right? The day-to-day kind of comings and goings of the relationship. Instead of us being able to just be in the moment and respond in the moment, we're often responding out of anxiety more than being responsive to our partner. And then a third way that anxiety can be troubling is anxiety drives compulsive action. And compulsive action is not the same as intentional action, right? So compulsive action is the action that anxiety says is okay, right? So anxiety says, hey, this is high risk to be in this relationship at all. But if you're going to be safe in this relationship, you need to at least check his phone all the time, right? Or you need to at least be aware of who she's talking to all the time, right? So it drives compulsive and obsessive action, right? And it's action that anxiety says, if you want to be safe and okay, here's the type of action you can take, which sometimes gets in the way of natural and organic interaction, right? That compulsive action is, again, being more about the anxiety and what the anxiety is driving than just being you and being yourself and showing up in the relationship in a healthy way. So it's obsessive, right? Anxiety is obsessive. It drives inaction or reaction or compulsive action. And anxiety ruins relationships because of self-fulfilled prophecy, right? So self-fulfilled prophecy just means that we accidentally create the thing we're nervous about in the first place. And many times that anxiety is showing up in marriage or in a relationship, a committed relationship, the anxiety oftentimes has to do with commitment, love, loyalty, commitment in the relationship. It's nervous that I'm going to love this person and give them my heart, and then inevitably they're going to leave me or not want me or discard me, or I'm going to find out they're cheating on me or lying to me, or all the catastrophic things, right? All the what ifs that anxiety is really good at inventing and saying they're all equal probability, so watch out for all of them. Which makes relationships so exhausting, right? That self-fulfilled prophecy can sometimes happen in a relationship without people even realizing it's occurring. Like, for example, I'll go into a relationship a little hesitant, and I go into the relationship a little hesitant because I want to make sure I'm protected and I'm safe. My partner is not going to put anything over on me. Well, as I go in hesitant, I'm not really being the organic, natural me. I'm not being the real me in the relationship. I'm being kind of a withheld version of me, a careful version of me, right? A kind of suspicious version of me. And as I'm that way, I'm a little less lovable. Like, it's a little bit harder to be close and connected to me when I'm hesitating like that and I'm pulled back in the relationship. Anxiety says it's the safest stance to be in because then I'm protected if I get rejected, right? But the problem is, as I'm in that stance, I'm also a lot harder to connect with. So if that relationship doesn't work out, some of the reason it doesn't work out might be because I'm being so withheld in the relationship, which in that way then anxiety created the very thing I was trying to avoid, right? It made it more likely, anxiety made it more likely that the relationship didn't work out than actually helping the relationship work. So I ran into this principle recently. I'll tell you this story about this individual that highlights this idea that anxious procrastination is not the same as healthy preparation, right? So anxious procrastination is not the same as healthy preparation. And the circumstance that I ran into is that he had been in a relationship previously. He'd been married previously. And in his previous relationship, it seemed in the first or second week of their marriage, as he met this woman and decided he wanted to spend his life with her, that she kind of became disenchanted in the relationship. She was very blaming of him, critical of him about issues that were going on in their life, financially, in their social connections, in their interactions, and in the family of origin connections, right? She's very critical of him and became kind of disenchanted in her love with him. As the relationship progressed, he kind of hoped it would get better, and he tried to learn from the criticisms that she would throw out there, things that he could do better to maybe please her more. And it seemed the more that he tried, the more discontented she became. And eventually she told him, I'm not in love with you. I don't want to be with you. I don't like you. I want you out of my life. And ended up discarding him a little less than a year into their marriage. And it was devastating for him. He's a good man. He was trying hard to please his wife. And we don't know all the story on her side, but certainly the relationship ended tragically in a very disenchanted way. And he felt completely inadequate. And it took him a lot of work individually to gain back his self-confidence and his self-esteem, to believe that he had something worth offering in a relationship. Well, fast forward now, he's dating this new woman who's really interested in being engaged and getting married to him, right? And who can blame her? He's a great guy, right? So here they are in this relationship. He's in this dating relationship. They've been with each other for long enough that he really feels love for her and feels like she loves him. But he's really hesitant to tie the knot, right? Like to get committed, to take that step to even get engaged brings him so much anxiety, right? And what anxiety tells him is wait longer, this procrastination idea, right? Put it out there further, right? Give yourself more time to watch and see, right? Maybe there's things you're missing. Maybe there's red flags that you're not seeing. And anxiety always says the further out there the engagement is, or the further out there a wedding date is, the more safe you are, right? The more secure you are. In fact, if we listen to anxiety, he may never tie the knot with another person again, right? Because just by going through the action of letting another person into his world, just by taking those steps, anxiety is able to say, what if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? All kinds of catastrophic scenarios. I'm sure you can think of a few of those that might happen, right? So the safest thing is to not let the relationship progress, right? Which, if he listens to anxiety, the relationship won't progress. The only way the relationship is going to progress into deeper places is if he pushes off anxiety a little bit and connects a little bit more organically and authentically in the relationship, really looks at and interacts with the person in front of him instead of looking at and interacting with anxiety in front of him, right? So it was a really difficult situation for him. And one of the things that he did that was really helpful is he started to write down all of the things that he knows about his partner that were good and that were lovable, that seemed like safe characteristics, right? Characteristics that said that she valued him and that he had worth, right? He started to keep a note of those, that he could use those and reference those when anxiety would come knocking on the door and saying, alert, alert, right? Like last time you were in a committed relationship like this, she tore out your heart, man. Why are you getting into another one? So it was really helpful for him, right, to write out that list. And it was also helpful for him, after he did that list, to write out the things that he felt like were qualities in his previous spouse that ended up in the demise, right? The things that led to their relationship not working out. And one was that his previous spouse was very critical. It was hard for him to ever be good enough in that relationship, right? And so he would write that one out and then ask himself the question, right, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much do I feel like that's playing out in my current relationship, right? And he would rate that. And then he would find another quality and do the same, right? So he'd look at the qualities responsibly of the previous relationship and kind of make note of those. Are they happening now? And he found that they weren't, right? That she had a very different character, a very different mind than his previous relationship. And going through that process of looking at the demise, right? And then asking himself and looking for evidence in his current relationship for those issues, it was really helpful for him to realize they don't exist. On a very small scale, some of them exist, versus kind of being prominent and dominant in his previous relationship. So taking a look at those inventories that he did were really helpful in him kind of taking that leap, right? Setting aside anxiety and saying, I know that there's risk, there's always risk in love, right? But I feel like this is an educated decision that I've made with a lot of consideration, and it's likely to succeed. And he's able to move forward in that manner, right? The other item that I think is important for us to address is that rumination is not the same as mindful action, right? So sometimes we can, I introduced this term earlier, this rumination term. Sometimes we can kind of ruminate and spin out in the same place over and over and over again in the relationship versus moving forward in a healthy way. And certainly you saw this with this gentleman that I just gave you the example of. And I'll give you one other example of this principle, this ruminating principle, right? Stopping productive and healthy action in the relationship. So a lady this time that I was working with, she was in a relationship with a man that about 5 years ago in their marriage had an emotional affair. He ended up connected to this woman that he worked with, and their conversation slowly led into more and more emotional depth. And they ended up forming kind of an inappropriate emotional relationship with one another, both of them being married to other partners, sharing much more of their life, much more of their time, even carving out time and space to be together and alone together, to really bond and connect. They were doing emotional connection with each other on a much deeper level than they were doing with their spouses, and started to lead toward physical temptation in their relationship. And it was about that time that his wife discovered it. This lady that I'm working with discovered that her husband was in this kind of inappropriate emotional connection. Really broke her heart. She really felt hurt and sad and betrayed, and for good reason in the relationship, right? He was stepping into areas that he shouldn't have been with his coworker. And so we did a lot of work around that. They came in to do some therapeutic work. We did some couples counseling around that, exploring on his end what was going on and how he put himself in this place and things that he could do to safeguard and protect the relationship from being in that place again, and trying to heal her heart and her mind, the impact that this betrayal had on her. And they did fantastic. They were loving, they were patient, they were kind to each other through that process, and we really did a lot of great work. And we got to a place in the relationship where the relationship now was being held back because of anxiety that still existed in her, that if she started to give her whole mind and her whole heart again, what if he betrayed her again, right? What if he ended up in a situation where he began another emotional affair or even started to step into a physical affair? And that thought, that what if catastrophic kind of scenario would create such pause inside of her that she would feel frozen in the relationship. She wasn't able to dig into deeper places of her heart, her emotional intimacy, the physical intimacy of the relationship was suffering, right? It made it really hard for her to go to those places because she kept asking herself the question, what if I put myself out there again and I find out that he ends up cheating on me again, right? And that thought, that worry became such an obsession in her mind that it really held her back in taking the next steps in their vulnerability, right? Really fully giving her mind and her heart again in the relationship. It became really hard for her because of this thought constantly bombarding her. What if, right, we end up in this situation again that he cheats on me, right? And so it really was creating problems. Now, he wasn't doing a lot at that point in the relationship to stop the progression, right? He had done a lot of really responsible work in getting himself back into a place that he could safeguard and be loyal to the relationship, right? But at that point in their healing, it was really the anxiety holding back those next steps in the relationship. And one of the things that she ended up doing, right, is kind of, we call this sometimes in psychology, radical acceptance. Radical acceptance just means, right, like owning this idea that I talked about earlier, that love always presents risk. There's always risk in love, right? And because of that, there's some risk that has to be taken in order to find out, can our relationship have deeper connection, right? Like, I'm not going to know what's possible in my relationship without putting myself out there. And as I hold back in the relationship can only progress to a certain level, right? And it's a hard truth, but it's a real truth. The reality is deep, connected, meaningful relationships have a lot of vulnerability in them. And anxiety sees vulnerability as a high risk scenario. So it doesn't like vulnerability, right? So she kind of put herself in the spot where she said, okay, if I'm just mindful, right, about the work that we've done a lot of healing work. I feel like his mind is sincere, his heart is sincere. He's taken accountability. He's really worked to try to create safeguards. He understands bigger the triggers that led to his betrayal before, right? He seems like he's motivated and committed to me. All these evidences that she was able to kind of mindfully collect and use those to counterbalance the risk that anxiety was screaming at her, saying, okay, there is risk, True, and I will accept that there is risk, but the probability of risk seems a lot lower than you are presenting to me anxiety. And therefore, she was able to kind of push back on the anxiety and hold to her spouse versus pushing back on her spouse and holding to the anxiety. And it really helped them take the next steps in progressing in their relationship. So two examples there of times in which anxiety was causing issue and things that individuals did to try to move past that. I hope that this information is helpful to you. You may reference a video that we did recently as well, the video on stop paying it forward, that idea of carrying around old baggage in our relationships and the way in which past relationships can really impact the way in which we show up, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act in our current relationships. You may want to reference that YouTube video as well. It marries really well with this topic that we're reviewing today. If you'd like to learn more in general about how you can work out of old relationships into new ones, you may check out our Beginning Anew video course as well. And that video course goes into strategies like the ones I presented to you today and many additional strategies that you might be able to use in kind of transferring out of an anxious stance in a relationship and into more of a mindful, genuine, ready to connect type stance in your current relationship. So check that out as well. In the comments below, let us know an anxious thought that gets in the way of your relationship, right? Those catastrophic kind of thoughts that can think of whatever what-if scenario and treats them all with equal probability, right? Share one of those with us. Let us know one of those anxious thoughts that you've noticed hold you back in a relationship. And if you've found or discovered something in addition to what we've talked about today that's really helped you move past that thought, share that in the comments below as well. We'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful to be with you, and we look forward to being with you again soon. Take care.